Governments love to tell you they're working for your financial freedom. They speak of opportunity, growth, and stability, words polished by decades of repetition. But if you look closely at history, you'll see a darker truth. Governments have always used financial tricks to keep ordinary people working harder, earning less, and depending on the system that exploits them. These tricks are not new. They've been recycled for centuries, wrapped in new language, given modern names, but always serving the same goal: to transfer wealth upward while keeping the majority trapped below. This is Let's Talk About Money, where we uncover the patterns power doesn't want you to see. Let's start with the oldest and simplest trick of all: inflation. When a government spends more than it earns through taxes, it faces two choices. It can raise taxes, a political suicide, or it can quietly debase the currency, reducing the value of every coin, every note, and every paycheck. Ancient Rome mastered this tactic. In the 3rd century AD, emperors struggling to fund endless wars began cutting the silver content of the denarius, the empire's standard coin. What was once nearly pure silver became mostly bronze with only a thin wash of silver on top. The coins looked the same, but their value wasn't. Inflation exploded, savings evaporated, wages lagged behind. Rome had found a way to tax its citizens without ever admitting it, a silent tax still used today, only now with central banks instead of imperial mints. Fast forward to medieval Europe. Kings and monarchs perfected a new version of the same game: forced loans. When the treasury ran dry, the crown would request money from wealthy merchants and guilds. Refusal wasn't an option. Those who said no faced confiscation, prison, or worse. Repayment, when it came at all, arrived late and in devalued currency. The trick worked because it was disguised as patriotism, a duty to the realm, and for centuries it kept kingdoms alive at the expense of those who built their wealth honestly. By the 17th century, the trick had evolved into something even more sophisticated: institutional finance. In 1694, Britain founded the Bank of England, not to help its citizens, but to fund a war with France. The crown borrowed from the wealthy, promising interest payments guaranteed by taxes. It sounded like progress until you realized who paid those taxes. The rich lent money to the government and received interest. The poor paid taxes on salt, beer, and cloth. To fund that interest, it was a wealth transfer system masquerading as national finance. The government's debt became the people's burden, a pattern that still defines the global economy today. Because the safest investment in history has never been entrepreneurship or innovation, it's lending money to governments. And those loans are always repaid with your labor, your consumption, and your inflation. As the centuries passed, the tricks didn't vanish, they evolved. Governments discovered new ways to disguise old theft. The first was deficit spending, borrowing endlessly in the name of progress. Politicians promised infrastructure, jobs, and social programs. But much of the borrowed money flowed not to the public, but to contractors, corporations, and banks. When the debt came due, governments didn't cut elite privileges. They raised taxes, inflated the currency, or slashed public benefits instead. The debt was for the people. But the burden was always on their shoulders. Then came bailouts, perhaps the clearest financial trick of the modern age. In 2008, banks gambled with toxic mortgage securities and brought the world to the brink of collapse. Their losses should have destroyed them. Instead, governments rescued them with your money. Trillions were poured into financial institutions under the promise of saving the system. And it worked. For them. The very same banks that caused the disaster emerged larger, richer, and more powerful than before. The trick was simple: privatize the profits, socialize the losses. The public was told it was necessary to protect the economy. But in reality, it protected the hierarchy. Even the way governments handle pensions and retirement is built on illusion. For decades, citizens have paid into state-run systems, believing their contributions were safely invested for the future. But the truth is different. Most governments spend that money immediately and leave IOUs in its place. It's a generational Ponzi scheme dressed in legal language. It works only as long as new taxpayers keep feeding the system. When populations age and birth rates fall, The promise becomes unsustainable. And what happens next? The reforms begin, raising retirement ages, cutting benefits, or inflating away the value of payouts. Each step justified as necessary, each one eroding what people worked for. It's the same trick as Rome's debased coin, only now it's called policy. Governments have learned to weaponize language as financial camouflage. Inflation becomes growth. Forced loans become patriotism. National debt becomes investment. Bailouts become stability. Pension cuts become reform. The words change. The direction of wealth does not. It always flows upward. Why does this keep working? Because most people don't study economic history. They see inflation as natural, taxes as inevitable, and complexity as proof of intelligence. But the truth is simple. The system depends on your ignorance. Every time the public stops paying attention, the trick is repeated, refined, renamed, and executed again. By the 21st century, the greatest trick of all had emerged. Quantitative easing, a term so bland that most people never question it. In the wake of the 2008 crisis, central banks created trillions out of nothing, buying bonds and assets to stabilize markets. And it worked, again, for the top. Stock prices soared, real estate values exploded, but ordinary households without large investments saw almost nothing. The wealth gap widened to historic levels, yet the public was told this was economic recovery. The trick succeeded because it was too complex to see. A flood of digital money printed to preserve the same architecture of inequality. There is one financial trick so powerful that it touches everyone every day without being seen. It's called stealth taxation, the art of taking wealth without ever collecting it directly. Instead of raising income taxes, governments rely on quiet levers, sales taxes, fuel duties, and most of all, inflation. When prices rise faster than wages, your savings lose value, your paycheck buys less, and yet politicians call it healthy growth. Inflation is not a mistake of policy, it is policy. It's the invisible tax that reduces government debt while quietly stealing from citizens. You might feel richer because your salary went up. But if your rent, food, and energy rise faster, you've been taxed without a single law being passed. That's the genius of the trick. The pattern doesn't stop there. Consider regulatory capture. When the industries meant to be regulated begin to control their regulators. It's as old as capitalism itself. Railroads in the 19th century, oil giants in the 20th, tech and finance today all have shaped the rules that were supposed to restrain them. Governments appear to protect the public, while the largest corporations carve out loopholes and monopolies that keep competition down and profits flowing. The public sees protection, the insiders see profit. And when all else fails, there's the oldest trick in politics: war finance. Every empire from Rome to Washington has learned that nothing opens the public purse faster than the word patriotism. During World War I and II, citizens were told to buy war bonds, a noble act on the surface, but also a risk-free investment for the wealthy, guaranteed by future taxes. In the 21st century, the same pattern continues. Trillions spent on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were financed through debt, enriching defense contractors, banks, and bondholders, while taxpayers carried the bill. The genius of the trick is always the same. Make it too complex to follow. Modern budgets are labyrinths. Tax codes run thousands of pages. Financial programs are buried behind acronyms. In ancient Rome, the debased coin was the physical proof of deceit. Today, it's hidden in spreadsheets and policy jargon. Complexity is camouflage. Why does this matter now? Because every one of these tricks still operates today, faster, deeper, and on a global scale. Inflation erodes savings. Debt expands endlessly. Bailouts are now routine. Central banks print trillions to stabilize markets. And every time the public celebrates short-term relief, the structure tightens around them. The system isn't broken. It's designed this way to keep you working harder for less real wealth, while financial power concentrates at the top. Different ages, same mechanism. When Rome debased its coins, citizens suffered. When monarchs forced loans, merchants lost fortunes. When modern states print and borrow, households bear the burden. Most people will never escape these tricks because they don't even realize they're being played. They take inflation as natural, taxes as moral, and bailouts as mercy. But ignorance is the most powerful trick of all. When people forget the past, they cannot recognize its repetition. That's why understanding economic history isn't just education, it's defense. Knowledge makes you harder to manipulate. If you know how money works, you see through the illusion. So what can you do? First, always ask who benefits. When governments announce stimulus, ask who profits first. When inflation rises, remember it's not an accident, it's policy. When regulations appear, look at who wrote them. Second, build wealth outside the traps. Assets that hold value when currency does not. Land, skills, productive businesses, and scarce resources. And third, never assume the system works for you because it says it does. Systems exist to protect themselves, not you. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes with precision. And if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. The same financial tricks that kept Roman citizens broke are draining your account today, only wrapped in modern language. This is Let's Talk About Money, because once you see the trick, you can never unsee it.